Okay, I'm a believer. Hello and welcome to another Random Distractions home theater video. If you saw my previous home theater video, before I could install that Emotiva amp, I needed to do a little cable management. But now that that was done, it's time to hook up the amp. But first I wanted to hear what the system sounded like just to get it fresh in my mind. So I decided to turn off ARC and listen to a couple of different things. First, the Dolby Atmos demo. And here's a quick sample of a music file in the 5.2.2 profile. And here's that same song in the 2.2 profile. Now that I had a feel for it, I was ready to start hooking it up. First thing was to label the RCA cables. I then moved my entertainment center out to get to the back. It has slots in the back, but they're all towards the top, and since my receiver is at the bottom, I decided I needed to have some sort of easier access to that. I took a food storage container that was big enough to fit my hand, but not big enough that it made me noticeable from the front. I used a Sharpie to outline the back, and then a box cutter to cut out the shape. The backing on this entertainment center was a little thicker than I expected, so it took a little work, but finally got it out. Now it's time to start labeling the cables. If you missed my review on the Phomemo D30 label printer and the blue labels that I'm using, make sure to check that out. It was definitely handy, and I really like the way the labels came out. Once everything was labeled, I was ready to hook everything up to the receiver. I decided to hook up the fronts, center, and surrounds to the amp and just have the Dolby fronts on the receiver. On a side note, I did have a comment on one of my previous videos asking whether I thought the MRX1140 just driving the Dolby fronts would be a little overkill since you can reassign the amp channels. However, the receiver does have two different amps. A Class AB amp rated at 140 watts into two channels, and a Class D amp rated at 60 watts into two channels. The Class D amp is the one that would power the Dolby speakers. And while you can reassign some of the channels, the only height channel that the Class AB amp can power is height 3 or none at all. The height 3 option is only for back in ceiling, back Dolby, or back on wall. I currently only have two Dolby speakers and they are the front firing kind, so that would not be an option for me at all. With the receiver all hooked up, it was time to move the cables over to the amp. However, you will see later on that I had to redo the cables in the way that they were going into the amp shelf. I did some more cable management once everything was settled, and I was definitely glad that I had those Velcro ties because as I mentioned earlier, I did have to redo some of it, and even while I was doing the other stuff, I had to redo stuff, and so it was nice to be able to just unvelcro and Velcro back up. Links to the supplies I used are down below. Before taking the amp out to hook everything up, I peeled off the little front cover. I pulled out the amp and realized, unfortunately, that the cables were not long enough. So I had to redo some stuff in the back and rerouted them and made them long enough so that they would stick out far enough. And then I was able to hook everything up and put it back in its place. And now for the moment of truth. I flipped the power switch on the amp and then turned on my Anthem receiver, and because of the trigger cable, it turned on the amp as well. So what did I think after it was all hooked up? I'm not sure if it'll come through on YouTube, but I did re-record the videos from earlier on in the video. Here's the Dolby Atmos demo. And here's that song in the 5.2.2 profile. And here's that same song in the 2.2 profile. I wasn't sure what to expect. I didn't mention this in the unboxing of the Emotiva amp, but up until this point, I've been really happy with the performance of the MRX1140 by itself. It gets plenty loud, and I didn't really feel like I was missing anything. But even though I was happy with the receiver, I kept having that little nagging feeling of what if? And I even had some comments in the previous videos saying that the A5 may not be any better than what my receiver can do, or that I should have gone with something that has more power. I did consider the A2 and the A3, but when I was looking, there wasn't any in stock, and I didn't know when they would be back in stock. I figured the A5 would be a good way to see if amplification would really make a difference when it's only 90 watts per channel. If it didn't, I could still use my receiver for the front left-right speakers, and then use the amp for the rest of the speakers. If it did, and I felt like I needed more power, then I would still have an upgrade path. So did it make a difference? Absolutely. The first thing I listened to was the Dolby Atmos demo, and in the beginning I'm like, well, that doesn't sound that much different, but then as it kept on going, I started hearing things that I hadn't heard before. Like, I knew they were there, but they weren't coming through, and not with as much presence as what they were coming through now. So for example, the insect noises in the first few scenes, and then the raindrops, how much clearer and more present they sounded. I watched the airport scene from Captain America Civil War, and it's a similar experience. So things were still there, but I heard like the rustling of their clothes, or the punches were a little bit more present, and even like their footsteps and things like that were a lot more present than they were before. In addition to listening to the music track that I played in this video, I also listened to a couple of songs on my Spotify playlist that I listen to all the time, and it was the same experience there too. So before the amp, when I listened to music in the 5.2.2 profile, everything would be there, but when I switched over to the 2.2 profile on just the receiver alone, the front stage, really came alive because it was only having to power those two front speakers, and the subs were handling, their power on their own. But whenever I would switch back to the 5.2.2, it felt like everything would take just a step back. However, with the amp, it no longer takes a step back when I use the 5.2.2 profile. Everything is there. And just like as I mentioned for the Dolby Atmos demos and the Captain America Civil War, instruments were there, but then other stuff that would normally kind of be a little bit more in the back became more present, while still maintaining the sound stage. So vocals were still in the middle, and then instruments felt like they were in different places depending on what I was listening to. And as I mentioned before, when it was just a receiver, when I would switch from the 5.2 to the 2.2, I would notice a difference in loudness, the 2.2 being louder. But now with the amp, when I switch between them, there's not as much of a difference. If anything, the 5.2.2 seems to be even louder than the 2.2. I've heard this analogy before, and it's definitely applicable for me as well, that it felt like before there was like a veil, in front of my speakers, and now that veil is gone and everything is just coming through. So now that I can hear the benefits of amplification, will I be upgrading to provide more power to the front stage? No. As I mentioned in previous videos, the speakers that I have are the Pioneer Andrew Jones speakers, which are, I think, over 7 years old now, maybe. But they don't have very crazy power handling capabilities. However, with everything that I'm using to run them now, I think they sound great. And I think I'm either at peak or close to peak performance that I will be able to get from them. And as much as I would like to get some new speakers, I'm okay for now, maybe in a couple of years. Besides, there's so many options out there, but here's some of the ones that I've been thinking about. The newly introduced Monolith Encore series speakers, the SVS Prime Pinnacle series, ELAC Reference series, which actually, are done by Andrew Jones, the KLH speakers, specifically like the Kendall Tower speakers, the newly released Polk Reserve series, which I've heard a lot of good things about, the Heiko Aurora speakers, those look really interesting, and the Arundel 1961 speakers, which look really great, and also have heard good stuff about them too. Like I said, maybe in the future, but for now, I'm just gonna watch some movies and listen to some music with this current setup. Well, to summarize, the Emotiva BasX A5 may be just kind of like an entry level with 90 watts per channel, but even compared to just running the Anthem MRX1140 by itself, it really makes a difference. So if you're wondering if it's enough or will be enough, in my case at least, it definitely is, and so I'm looking forward to enjoying it for quite some time. With that said, the only other thing that I'm going to do next is rerun ARC and see how that sounds. So I'll let you guys know if there's any changes or whether it's for better or for worse. We'll see. And that's all I have for now. Thank you for watching the video. I would definitely appreciate a like, of course, on this video. And make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you'll be notified when the next one drops. And until then, I hope you have a good one.